All right, so first I wanted to thank Jerry and Emily for organizing this creative and unconventional session. I'm Jennifer Mokos, and I'm an assistant professor at Coastal Carolina University. And just to situate myself, I am an interdisciplinary human geographer and an ethnographer, and I broadly work on issues at the intersection of human health and landscape health. So for example, some of my research projects have focused on housing and homelessness, river restoration, and also I'm currently working with communities that are affected by repetitive and ongoing catastrophic flooding. So my contribution to this video lexicon for community geography is to focus on the term community. And it's a term that probably seems pretty obvious, maybe even taken for granted. But I think it's worth exploring and being intentional about asking who is the community in community geography and how do we go about defining it. So here's the place where I confess that I'm really terrible at defining things. As soon as there's a bounded definition, I feel constrained by it. So this video likely functions as an invitation to be intentional about how we are defining the community and also maybe to expand the ways that we think about community and conceive of it rather than to narrow it to a specific definition. So when we talk about community and community geography, the first thing that comes to mind, at least for me, is to think about community as a position, and specifically an epistemic position. Community, specifically, community tends to mean not academic or not academic forms of expertise. At the core of community geography is an ethical commitment to work collaboratively with people in epistemic positions that are outside of formal academic expertise to co-produce knowledge, so to produce knowledge with them, to produce knowledge together. And that knowledge centers on the perspectives, voices, and priorities that are typically marginalized or historically excluded from mainstream academic research. And so this commitment shapes how community geographers tend to define the community in their research design. This can take multiple forms, but often involves collaboration with non-academic people within a community-based organization, an activist group, or other sort of specific geographic context in order to shape research questions, interpretations, and or the trajectories of the research project. And so I also wanted to mention that it's important to keep in mind that the community doesn't actually exist as a single sort of bounded unitary entity. Communities are heterogeneous and complex entities. And in the context of my own work, what that looks like is that instead of sort of partnering with a specific group or organization, it looks more like focusing on a specific problem or action and then tracing out the connections and involvements like a network of relations. So for example, in my research in California, I was interested in rivers that were being restored for ecological reasons, but these rivers were also home to long-term homeless encampments. And so I started thinking about who do I need to talk to and get to know and work with in order to understand this situation or this act. And with the idea that sort of all of these relations are important in order to create research that betters the community. In the end, my work led me to partnering with over 10 different community-based organizations, and those are in social services and the environmental fields, along with groups of people from the river bottom who weren't officially part of any organization, along with local public officials and even the US Army. So what this research design led me to do was to allow me to build trusting relationships with people across diverse sites of power and privilege. And so people shared parts of themselves with me and their experiences with me in a way that they wouldn't necessarily share with each other. And so I bring this up to say that I think it's important to think about the ways that community geographers can use their privilege and their privileged position to access data from perspectives that are not as readily accessible to more marginalized positions within the community. And so this leads me to think about or define community beyond a position or place. In a broader sense, I also think of community as a relation and a process. So community is something that can be created through the research process, and it's something that changes over time. it is at least partially out of your hands or your control. And so I wanted to end on this note with some questions for discussion to think about what does it mean to be in community with others through your work as a community geographer? And even in a sort of more meta sense, how can community geographers create community through their scholarship and their practice? Thank you.